The pilot's lounge smelled faintly of coffee and jet fuel. Elijah Jackson sat stiffly in one of the leather chairs, hands folded tightly over the student badge clipped to his shirt. His heart thumped like a small engine before takeoff. This was supposed to be his first day shadowing real pilots, a chance to see the world he had dreamed of since childhood. The door creaked open. Captain Whitman stepped in, crisp uniform shining, silver wings pinned proudly to his chest. His eyes swept the room and landed on Elijah. They narrowed instantly. "You, what are you doing in here?" His voice cut through the quiet like a warning alarm. Elijah stood quickly, his palms sweating. "Hello, sir. I'm Elijah Jackson. I'm part of Horizon Airlines' career exploration program. Miss Reynolds from HR told me to wait here for my guide." Whitman's lips curled into a cold smirk. "Career exploration? This is not a playground, especially not for outsiders like you. Get out." Elijah's chest tightened. He lifted his badge carefully. I have permission, sir. Here's my badge." Before he could finish, Whitman yanked it from his neck. The strap snapped with a sharp crack that echoed across the lounge. Whitman turned the badge over, his face twisting with disdain. "Fake! Just as I thought," Whitman declared loudly, holding it up like evidence of a crime. "Security breach. You don't belong here." Elijah's throat dried. His voice came out thin, trembling. "No, sir. Please. Miss Reynolds gave it to me this morning. I haven't done anything wrong." Whitman ignored him and pressed his radio. "Airport security, respond immediately. Intruder in the pilot's lounge. Likely using fake credentials. Handle with urgency." Murmurs began outside the glass windows. Airport staff and a few pilots peered in, curiosity quickly shifting to suspicion. Elijah's skin burned under their stares. "Please." Elijah tried. Again. But his words drowned in the low buzz of judgment filling the room. "Save your excuses," Whitman snapped. "You're a risk. You people always think you can sneak into places you don't belong. Not today." The words hit Elijah like a slap. His chest heaved, but he refused to cry. He reached into his pocket, trembling, pulling out his phone. "At least, let me call my father. He can explain." Whitman laughed coldly. "Go ahead. I doubt your father can help you here. Maybe he's a janitor in this airport? If so, I'll make sure he's fired for letting you cause this mess." The lounge went silent. Even the murmuring crowd outside froze at the cruelty of that remark. Elijah swallowed the lump in his throat, fingers shaking as he dialed his father's number. Each ring dragged out longer than the last. He remembered the first time he saw a Boeing jet take off with his father by his side. He remembered his father's voice telling him, "Son, the sky belongs to those who never give up." Elijah clutched the phone tighter. His father would come. He had to. At that moment, the heavy footsteps of airport security thundered down the hall, and Elijah's nightmare truly began. Elijah's past, his dream. For as long as Elijah could remember, the sky had been more than just an open canvas of blue above his head. It had been a calling. The fascination had started when he was a boy, barely tall enough to peer out the back window of his family's modest home in Maryland. He would sit on the small porch, eyes wide, watching the aircraft climbing out of Dulles Airport, their engines rumbling across the evening air. The sight of those massive machines shrinking into the distance filled him with wonder. To anyone else, they were just airplanes, but to Elijah, they were living symbols of possibility, carrying people across oceans and continents, connecting lives and shrinking the world into something more reachable. His father, David Jackson, was the first to recognize that spark in his son's eyes. David himself had grown up with very little. His own father had been a mechanic, and his mother a schoolteacher. But through sheer dedication and relentless pursuit of excellence, he had risen to become one of the top administrators at the Federal Aviation Administration. He managed entire sectors of air safety, negotiated with airline executives, and signed off on the very systems that kept millions of passengers safe every day. Yet despite his heavy responsibilities, David never allowed his position to make him distant from his family. He carried himself not just as an FAA official, but as a father who believed that his son's dreams were as important as any regulation or policy he enforced. When Elijah was 6, David had arranged a surprise for his birthday. The boy remembered being dressed in his little blue jacket, holding his father's hand as they walked across the tarmac of Dulles International Airport. The sun had been setting, painting the sky in streaks of orange and purple. Towering above him was a Boeing 777, its polished fuselage glinting in the light, its engines resting like slumbering beasts. Elijah could still recall the awe that made his breath hitch when he stood underneath its massive wing, the sheer size making him feel small but not insignificant. That was the day his father knelt beside him and whispered that the sky was not reserved for a chosen few. It was open to anyone bold enough to claim it. From that moment, Elijah's bedroom transformed. The walls became covered with posters of aircraft, Concorde, Boeing Dreamliner, Airbus A350, even sketches of the Wright brothers' fragile flyer. His shelves filled with model planes he had saved for through small chores, each one carefully assembled with the patience of a boy who believed each wing and tailpiece was a piece of his destiny. He spent hours reading about aerodynamics, flipping through thick library books that most kids his age would have found boring. He would sit at his computer deep into the night, flying simulated routes, practicing takeoffs and landings, learning how to handle turbulence, and even rehearsing emergency scenarios. His mother often scolded him to go to bed, but his father would smile quietly from the doorway, recognizing the discipline beneath his son's obsession. Yet passion alone did not shield Elijah from the sting of doubt. As he grew older, the voices of discouragement grew louder. At school, some classmates scoffed at his ambition, saying, "Kids like us don't become pilots. We ride in the back, not sit in the cockpit." Others, even adults, would smile in a patronizing way, as if humoring a child's fantasy rather than acknowledging a teenager's genuine calling. Those words cut deeply, but whenever Elijah faltered, David would step in with the same steady conviction that had carried him through his own struggles. He would place a hand on his son's shoulder and remind him, "Others may doubt you, but never doubt yourself. You belong to the sky, Elijah, and the sky will always be there, waiting for you." Those words became Elijah's armor. He carried them into every challenge, every setback, and every triumph. When the Horizon Airlines announced their competitive aviation career exploration program, Elijah poured himself into the application with a focus and determination that surprised even his teachers. He wrote an essay about his dream, not just to fly airplanes, but to inspire others who looked like him, those who had been told they did not belong in certain spaces, to realize that the cockpit was not closed off by skin color or background. He spoke of his father's lessons, of the countless hours of practice, and of the faith that had carried him this far. The day the acceptance letter arrived, Elijah's hands shook so much that he couldn't open it himself. His father had read the words aloud, and in that moment, as tears blurred Elijah's vision, he had felt the dream take a solid step closer to reality. Now, standing accused in the pilot's lounge, those memories collided painfully with the present. The joy of being chosen, the sleepless nights of preparation, the smile on his father's face, all of it seemed fragile under the weight of Captain Whitman's cold disdain. The badge ripped from his neck had been more than just plastic and ink. It had been the symbol of his victory, the proof that he belonged in this place. And in an instant it was branded as fake, as worthless, as though his very dream could be dismissed simply because of who he was. Yet even in that despair, Elijah could hear his father's voice echoing through his memory. "Never doubt yourself. You belong to the sky." He clung to those words, drawing strength from them, even as his heart pounded and fear tried to overwhelm him. He knew this was not just about today. It was about every tomorrow he hoped to have. And though his voice shook and his hands trembled, a quiet fire still burned in him, one that would not let his dream be stolen so easily. The boy who had once stood beneath a Boeing 777 now stood under suspicion and prejudice. but his spirit refused to collapse. What Whitman saw as an intruder was, in fact, a future pilot, one whose wings were still waiting to unfold. And deep down, Elijah knew that his father, the man who had once given him the sky as a gift, would not let those wings be clipped without a fight. Security steps in. The air inside the pilot's lounge grew thick with silence, a silence that was not empty but heavy, filled with suspicion, whispers, and judgment. Elijah felt every pair of eyes weighing down on him as if their stares alone could condemn him. His chest rose and fell in quick, shallow breaths, his badge gone, his innocence stripped away by the authority of one woman's voice. The sound of hurried boots striking against the polished floor came closer, and within moments 2 airport security officers pushed through the doorway. They were not rushed or frantic. They carried the calm, imposing authority of men who were used to dealing with real threats. Their gray uniforms seemed colder than steel, their expressions carved in stone, and their presence made Elijah feel as though the entire system had been called against him. The taller of the 2 officers, a man with a stern, chiseled face, scanned the room with quick precision before locking his gaze on Elijah. His eyes did not hold the warmth of curiosity, but the scrutiny of suspicion, the kind that instantly judged before questions were asked. He stepped forward, voice measured but sharp enough to cut through the murmurs in the room. "Young man, explain yourself. How did you get into this restricted area?" Elijah's throat tightened. His palms felt clammy, and for a moment he wondered if words would even come out. He forced himself to inhale slowly, steadying his trembling body. His father's voice rang faintly in his mind. "Stay calm, stay true, speak clearly, even when they won't listen." That small reminder kept him from collapsing completely. He lifted his chin slightly, though his voice trembled as he spoke. "Sir, my name is Elijah Jackson. I'm part of Horizon Airlines' career exploration program. Miss Tanya Reynolds from HR brought me here this morning and told me to wait for my guide. I haven't crossed into any area without permission." The second officer, shorter and heavier set, exchanged a quick look with his partner, as though weighing the truth of the boy's words. For a fleeting second, Elijah thought he might have broken through. But before that hope could take root, Captain Whitman's sharp voice sliced into the moment like a blade. "That is a lie," she said flatly, her eyes blazing with conviction that was not supported by evidence, but by prejudice. She crossed her arms, radiating the smug assurance of someone who believed her authority could never be questioned. "I have been with this airline for 20 years. Not once has any program student been allowed into the lounge without supervision. His badge is fake. I could tell the moment I saw it. He is an intruder, plain and simple. If you value flight safety, you will remove him immediately before more damage is done." Her words dripped with certainty, and that certainty spread through the crowd like wildfire. People who had been hesitant, unsure, now began nodding subtly. Some whispered to each other, their doubts about Elijah's presence growing stronger under the captain's influence. The officers, too, shifted their stance. Where there had been a sliver of doubt, there was now hardened suspicion. The taller on, he extended his hand toward Elijah, palm open but firm, his voice leaving no room for negotiation. "Hand over any other identification you have. Wallet, student ID, whatever is on you. We'll verify it properly." Elijah fumbled with his pocket, his hands trembling so violently that even pulling out his wallet felt like a task too great. His student ID slipped against his fingers before he managed to hand it over. His voice, though fragile, carried the desperation of someone fighting not just for himself, but for the dream he refused to lose. "This is my real ID. I'm not lying. Please, call Miss Reynolds. She will tell you herself. She gave me the badge this morning." But the murmurs from outside grew louder, not softer. People had stopped listening to the boy's words. They were listening to Whitman, to the authority of her voice, to the narrative she had so confidently declared. To them, it was easier to believe in the power of her uniform than in the trembling defense of a student. Whitman's lips curved into a slight, satisfied smirk as she watched Elijah struggle. "There it is again," she said coldly. "Excuses, Excuses. First, it was a fake badge. Now he's hiding behind an HR name none of you have even seen today. Do not let him spin this any longer. He has breached security. Handle him. The shorter officer took a step closer. His hand hovered near the cuffs on his belt, a silent warning of what could come next. Elijah's heart raced, his knees weak beneath him. In that moment, he wanted nothing more than to vanish, to escape the crushing weight of injustice pressing him into the floor. Yet he did not collapse. He remembered his father's words, carved deep into his memory. The sky belongs to those who refuse to give in. Summoning every shred of courage, Elijah lifted his voice again, stronger this time, though tears burned at the corners of his eyes. Please, don't treat me like a criminal. I've worked for this my whole life. I'm here because I belong here. If you would just make one call, you'll see I'm telling the truth. I just want a chance to learn, to fly, to prove myself. That's all. The words hung in the air, raw and vulnerable. For a moment the silence shifted, some of the onlookers shifting uneasily, guilt flickering across their faces. But Whitman would not relent. Her arms folded tighter, her voice dripping with disdain. Do not be fooled by his act. This is exactly how infiltrators work. Smooth talk, fake stories, emotional manipulation. Don't let him trick you. End this now. The taller officer nodded slowly, his decision tipping against Elijah. He stepped forward, closing the distance, his tone final. Enough. You'll come with us. If your story checks out, you'll be released. If not, you'll face the consequences. Elijah's stomach dropped. The room blurred around him, the faces blending into a wall of judgment. He thought of his mother, of how she would weep if she knew what was happening. He thought of his father, of the faith that had always seemed unshakable. His voice cracked as he made one final plea, clutching the phone still in his hand. Please, just let me call my dad before you take me. Whitman chuckled darkly, her voice loud enough for everyone to hear. By all means, call him. I can't wait to see the look on his face when he realizes his son tried to play pilot in a world that will never accept him. The cruelty of her words left the lounge stunned into silence. And in that silence, Elijah pressed the call button with trembling hands, praying that his father's voice would answer before the nightmare swallowed him whole. The father arrives. The lounge had grown unbearably tense, the air heavy with suspicion and silent judgment. The two security officers stood flanking Elijah, ready to march him out, while Captain Whitman lingered near the door like a hawk that had cornered its prey. The crowd outside pressed closer against the glass, their whispers blending into a dull roar that made Elijah's head swim. He felt small, suffocated, as though the walls themselves were closing in. His dream, his dignity, and his future seemed moments away from being crushed under the weight of one false accusation. His phone, still trembling in his hand, was his last lifeline. And then, after what felt like an eternity of ringing, a voice answered. Elijah, what's wrong? The tone was calm, steady, but filled with an undercurrent of concern that only a father could carry. Relief swept through Elijah so suddenly that his knees nearly gave way. His lips parted, and the words poured out shakily, broken by the tremor of fear and desperation. Dad, please, you have to come. They don't believe me. They think I broke into the lounge with a fake badge. Please, come now. There was no hesitation on the other end, only the sound of his father's voice tightening with controlled urgency. Stay where you are. Don't argue anymore. I'll be there in minutes. And then the line went dead. Elijah lowered the phone slowly, his pulse still hammering. The officers exchanged a look, unmoved. Captain Whitman, however, tilted her head with mock amusement. So, Daddy's coming to rescue you? Good. Let him see what happens when children play games with national security. Perhaps he'll teach you where you truly belong. Her words cut deeply, and the cruel smirk on her face stoked the whispers among the bystanders. Some looked on with pity, but none stepped forward. Minutes passed, stretching into what felt like hours. Elijah's thoughts drifted back to every time his father had reminded him that storms, no matter how violent, always passed if you stood strong. But this storm felt endless. His throat was dry, his palms clammy, his heart pounding. Just when despair threatened to overtake him completely, the sound of determined footsteps echoed down the hall, slower than the officer's march, yet heavier, more commanding. The murmurs outside fell silent, like a tide drawing back before a wave. Heads turned toward the doorway. And there he was. David Jackson entered the lounge with measured steps, his tall frame exuding calm authority. He wore no pilot's uniform, no flashy insignia, just a neatly pressed suit and the quiet confidence of a man who knew his place in the world. His eyes, sharp yet steady, swept across the scene, lingering on his son. Elijah felt his breath hitch, relief and shame colliding in his chest. Relief that his father was here, shame that he had to see his son treated like a criminal. The taller officer straightened slightly, sensing something shift. "Sir, this is a restricted area. Unless you—" David didn't raise his voice, yet it carried through the room like a bell. "My son called me. Explain why he is being held here." Captain Whitman, bristling at being challenged, stepped forward briskly, her tone dripping with authority. "This young man, your son, you say, was caught in the pilot's lounge with a fake ID badge. He claims to be part of some program, but his story doesn't add up. For the safety of this airport, we must treat him as a security breach." David's gaze shifted to Whitman, steady and unblinking. He didn't rush to respond, didn't match her aggression. Instead, he reached calmly into the breast pocket of his jacket, pulled out a leather wallet, and flipped it open. The silver and blue identification gleamed under the lounge lights. The seal of the Federal Aviation Administration was unmistakable, the lettering bold. David Jackson, Senior Administrator, FAA Flight Safety Division. The room froze. For a moment, it felt as though the air itself had been sucked out. The officers leaned forward slightly, recognition flashing in their eyes. The murmurs outside dissolved into stunned silence, and Captain Whitman's smirk faltered, her confidence cracking for the first time. David closed the wallet and slid it back into his pocket with deliberate slowness. His voice remained calm, but there was steel beneath it. "This young man is Elijah Jackson. He is not an intruder. He is not a threat. He is my son, and he was personally selected to participate in Horizon Airlines' Career Exploration Program. Every step he has taken today was authorized. Every accusation you have made against him is not only false, but dangerous. You have taken a promising young student and treated him as a criminal based on nothing more than your prejudice." Whitman's lips parted, but no words came. The certainty that had fueled her accusations seemed to drain away under the weight of David's presence. She tried to recover, her voice weaker now. "Sir, I was only following protocol. His badge appeared fake, and without proper supervision." "Protocol?" David interrupted softly, his eyes narrowing. "Protocol requires evidence, not assumptions. Protocol demands fairness, not humiliation. Protocol does not permit you to rip a badge from a student's neck, brand him a liar, and call for his removal without even a single attempt to verify his story. That is not protocol, Captain Whitman. That is arrogance. That is prejudice." The words hit harder than any shout could have. The officers shifted uneasily, no longer sure where to stand. Some of the bystanders outside lowered their eyes, guilt pricking at their silence. Elijah stood frozen, awestruck by the power in his father's calm rebuke. David turned his attention briefly to the security officers. "Did either of you attempt to contact the HR department? Did either of you even consider verifying his claim before moving to detain him?" The officers, suddenly stripped of their certainty, exchanged glances and shook their heads slightly. David's voice lowered, yet carried greater weight. "Then you failed him, and you failed your duty." Whitman swallowed hard, her posture stiff. "Sir, I If I misjudged, then There is no if, David cut in. His voice remained calm, but it resonated with finality. You misjudged. You humiliated. And you attempted to destroy the dream of a young man who has done nothing but earn his place here. Look at him. Do you see a criminal? Or do you see a boy who belongs to the very future of aviation you claim to protect? The silence that followed was absolute. Whitman's face paled, her mouth opening and closing without sound. The officers lowered their eyes, and Elijah, for the first time since the nightmare began, felt the crushing weight lift from his chest. His father had not come in shouting or raging. He had come like a storm wrapped in stillness, and the entire room had bent beneath his quiet power. At that moment, Elijah realized that the lesson his father had always tried to teach him was unfolding before his eyes. True strength was not about loudness or force. It was about conviction, integrity, and refusing to bow to injustice. And in the face of that strength, the lies and prejudice of others had no place to stand. Redemption Legacy, the silence in the lounge felt endless, as if time itself had paused to absorb the weight of David Jackson's words. For several long seconds, no one moved, no one dared to speak. Captain Whitman's once confident posture was rigid now, her jaw tight as if she were searching for a defense that simply would not come. The security officers looked as though they had shrunk inside their uniforms, suddenly aware that their unquestioning obedience to her authority had made them complicit in humiliating a young man who had done nothing wrong. And beyond the glass, the gathered staff and pilots shifted uncomfortably, their earlier whispers of doubt replaced with a heavy sense of shame. David's presence filled the room, not with anger, but with an undeniable authority born of truth. His voice was steady, each word deliberate as he continued to speak, not just to Whitman or the officers, but to everyone within earshot. Every generation in aviation has faced challenges, he said, his gaze moving slowly across the crowd. There were times when people doubted that humans could fly at all. There were times when only a certain few were trusted to step into a cockpit, while others were told they did not belong. Yet history has always been proven wrong by those who refused to give up. Today, my son Elijah was told he did not belong here. Not because of his actions, not because of any violation of rules, but because someone chose to see him through the lens of prejudice rather than possibility. That is not how progress is made. That is how dreams are destroyed. His words carried a resonance that made even those outside the room lean closer, straining to hear. Elijah, standing just a few feet away, felt the sting of tears in his eyes, but this time they were not born of fear or humiliation. They were born of pride. His father was not just defending him, he was reclaiming his dignity, affirming in front of everyone that Elijah's dream was not a childish fantasy, but a rightful pursuit. Captain Whitman shifted, her face pale, her lips pressed tightly together. She finally spoke, her voice no longer sharp but subdued, almost defensive. I thought I was doing the right thing. I believed I was protecting the airline, the crew, the passengers. David raised a hand, cutting her off gently but firmly. You believed you were protecting them, yes. But what you truly did was protect your own prejudice. Real protection requires wisdom. It requires fairness. It requires the courage to see beyond assumptions. Instead, you chose the easiest judgment possible, and in doing so, you endangered something greater than safety. You endangered trust. The truth of his words hung like a heavy curtain. Whitman's shoulders slumped slightly, the certainty that had defined her every action now broken under the weight of exposure. The officers shifted uneasily again, and one of them cleared his throat. Mr. Jackson, the taller one said carefully, on behalf of airport security, we regret how this was handled. We should have verified his claims before acting. We accept responsibility for that mistake. It was not a full apology, but it was an acknowledgement. David gave a small nod, his expression still serious. See that it never happens again. Every young person who steps into this program deserves encouragement, not suspicion. Their future, and the future of aviation, depends on it. Just then, a hurried figure appeared in the doorway. Miss Tanya R. Reynolds, her face flushed with both worry and indignation, rushed into the lounge. Her eyes widened as she took in the scene. Elijah, pale but standing firm, the officers hovering near him, Whitman stiff with embarrassment, and David commanding the room with his quiet strength. "What on earth is happening here?" she demanded, her voice carrying the kind of authority that came from being both professional and protective. She rushed to Elijah's side, her gaze hardening as she turned to the others. "This student is with me. I personally escorted him here this morning. His badge is legitimate, and his participation in this program was approved weeks ago. Who dared to accuse him otherwise?" No one spoke. The silence was answer enough. Whitman lowered her eyes, unable to meet Reynolds' fiery glare. The HR officer's chest rose with anger as she looked back at Elijah. "I'm so sorry, Elijah. You should never have been treated this way. This was supposed to be your first step into your dream, not a nightmare." Elijah shook his head, his voice soft but steady. "It's okay, Miss Reynolds. I just didn't want to lose my chance." David placed a hand on his son's shoulder, his touch firm yet comforting. "You won't lose it, Elijah. Not now, not ever. Because the truth is stronger than lies, and your determination is stronger than doubt. Today was not the end of your dream. It was the test of it. And you passed." The room, once filled with suspicion and hostility, was now filled with a different kind of silence, the kind born from reflection, from realization, from the uncomfortable truth that had been laid bare. Slowly, a few pilots in the crowd began to nod, their eyes softening with something like respect. The officers stepped back, giving Elijah space rather than crowding him. Even Whitman, still stiff and pale, seemed to shrink into herself, her arrogance replaced with the way, aged of shame. Later that afternoon, Horizon Airlines issued a formal apology. Elijah's name was cleared, and the company promised to review its internal training to ensure that no student, or anyone, would ever again face such treatment. Whitman was quietly suspended pending investigation, though what mattered most to Elijah was not her fate, but the fact that his own future had been restored. The following week, Elijah sat in the jump seat of a training aircraft for the first time. His hands trembled slightly as he touched the controls, but his heart swelled with pride. The engines roared to life, and as the plane began its roll down the runway, Elijah remembered every word his father had spoken in that lounge. He belonged here. He had earned this. And nothing, not prejudice, not humiliation, not doubt, could take that away from him. That night, as the stars glittered above, Elijah sat with his father on the porch, the same porch where he had once watched planes climb into the distance as a boy. David spoke quietly, his gaze fixed on the sky. "You see, son, storms will always come. People will always doubt. But what matters is how you rise above it. One day you will sit in that cockpit as captain, and when you do, you will not just be flying for yourself. You will be flying for every person who was ever told they did not belong. That will be your legacy." Elijah looked up at the endless night sky, the same sky that had called to him since childhood. And in that moment, he knew with absolute certainty that his father was right. His dream was not just alive, it was unstoppable.